So here we are at Kerbal Space Center with the third and hopefully last needed attempt to launch this Grand Central Space Station. I'm going to turn on stability assist, full throttle, and launch. This is going up at a fairly decent acceleration. I've got liquid fuel engines, central engine, and some side engines, and also solid fuel boosters. With all of those, this is going up at quite an acceleration. We don't really need to be going that fast early on, so I'm going to ease off on the throttle with the liquid fuel engines and let the solid fuel engines do most of the work. Anything above about 300 meters per second when you're still in the lower atmosphere is basically just wasting fuel due to the extra air drag. Speaking of air drag, I've got most of the station itself enclosed in this fairing to make it more aerodynamic. Since the station has a lot of not so aerodynamic parts, this eases up the air resistance by making it more streamlined. Alright, booster rockets are done, so I'm going to jettison those and go on with just the liquid fuel engines. Looks like these side tanks are also almost out of fuel, so I'm going to jettison those. And at this point, I'm high enough in the atmosphere that drag is almost zero. So I'm going to start my turning eastward. The idea is that if you want to get into orbit, you need to be both very high up, specifically above the atmosphere and any other obstacles like mountains, and also going sideways very fast. East is most efficient because the planet's rotation, the day-night cycle, means that you're already going a little bit to the east just by virtue of being on the ground. So going further to the east means I can take advantage of the velocity I've already got. If we take a look at map view, we can see that I am only going to go up to about 35 kilometers if I just turn off the engines and coast. So I'm going to need to get significantly higher by upwards engine thrust. And of course also significantly faster sideways so I can actually be in orbit. I can probably speed up time a little bit here. Because again, I need to be at 70 kilometers or higher. And ideally, I'd like to be in a higher orbit, maybe 100 or 120 kilometers up, so as to make it easier for other ships to get to that orbit and rendezvous. So apoapsis is now above 70 kilometers, which is going to be good enough. Let's push that out to about 100, 120 for safety. Looks like the main engine has run out of fuel. At this point, I'm going to do a couple things. First of all, I'm going to get rid of this fairing. If we're in the atmosphere, or if we're out of the atmosphere, we don't need the fairing anymore. So let's jettison the fairing and that nose cone. And there's the station itself. Also, since the main engine has run out of fuel, I can jettison that whole tank. And we're left with one last stage, which I added in. A smaller engine, which is optimized for vacuum. It's most efficient in vacuum, terrible efficiency in atmosphere. But we're well out of the atmosphere now. And let's turn that on. See if we can boost the orbit to a stable level. And this should have plenty of fuel to get to orbit. So I'm going to leave this turned on for a while to boost apoapsis. Or alternatively, let's just wait till apoapsis and then start burning prograde to get to orbit. Turning that on, speeding up time a bit. The problem is this is a more efficient engine, but that's at the cost of lower total thrust. So it can burn for a long time on the fuel it's got, but the acceleration is very slow. And of course I've got to get to about 2,300 meters per second in order to be in orbit. Currently at about 2,000. That's getting closer and closer to orbit though. In fact, yeah, this is now in a stable orbit. Both the apoapsis and most importantly periapsis are above 70 kilometers. So if I just turned off the engine and let it go, it would stay in this orbit forever. But let's tidy this up a bit. Let's make this have an apoapsis of maybe 125,000. Oh, that's beyond that. Let's say 150,000. Okay, close enough. I'm also going to want to adjust my angular attitude so that it matches a nice, neat orbit. Let's say same orbital plane as the moon, a truly equatorial orbit, to make it easier to launch into that orbit. So a slight burn in the angular down direction, southwards direction. There. This now matches the orbital plane of the lunar orbit precisely. You can see that highlighted in yellow there. That'll make everything a two-dimensional problem instead of three-dimensional. Now I wait until apoapsis, the high point of the orbit, and fire engines in the prograde direction. That should expand periapsis. And I want that to also be about 150 kilometers. So it's a circular orbit. And a little off there, so I'll wait a little longer. And let's finish that burn. 950. Okay, this is now an almost perfectly circular orbit with a radius of, or a height of about 150 kilometers above ground level, or sea level. So the space station is now in exactly the orbit I want it in. Time to open it up. So I'm going to point this in the direction I want. Jettison the rocket that got it there. And open up the other parts. We've got solar panels, and we've got these docking ports. So I extend those. They were folded up so they'd fit in the fairing, but they're now extended. And there is the space station. Looks good. In a perfectly circular 150 kilometer orbit, with these armatures ready for smaller ships to dock at them, or these larger docking ports at the top and bottom for larger ships to dock at. And for tidiness, I'm also going to deorbit this rocket that got it there in the first place. And all I have to do for that is point it very carefully retrograde, turn on those engines, being careful not to hit the space station itself, and fire those thrusters, shrinking the orbit. And now this is no longer even in orbit. This is now on a suborbital trajectory that's going to intersect ground, probably burn up in the atmosphere. So I can just leave that. That'll fall into the atmosphere, burn up, and be destroyed. And switch back to the spaceship itself, or the station itself. make some minor adjustments to the categorization. Let's rename that as a station so it shows up as such on the map. Grand Central Station. And now I have this lovely space station in orbit, and any other ships can launch and dock at that. So there's a space station. See you next time.